I'm turning on my camera briefly, then I will shut it down just for the purposes of the connection. Good evening, everyone. My name is Walter Alvaran. I'm an Assistant State Conservationist for Field Operations for the Natural Resources Conservation Service for this area in Central Florida. I'd like to welcome you all to our Conservation Stewardship Program Producer Workshop. CSP is one of the programs that we use as tools to implement conservation on the ground, but CSP is also one that recognizes producers for previous conservation efforts. It is authorized through the Farm Bill and one of the largest programs in terms of funding allocated to NRCS. And CSP is a great program that can bring conservation and financial opportunities. It can help you achieve higher level of conservation, other conservation goals in your operation, but also ensure that previous conservation efforts are sustained. For the last 2 years, we have been able to fund every eligible application. Last year, I believe we received around $8 million. And this year we have allocated $12 million. So we cannot make any promises that we will be able to once again fund every eligible application, but we can tell you that we want to obligate all of this funding and not send any funding back. We want to leave it here in Florida supporting our ag producers. So coming next week on March 25th, we will be having the CSP sign-up cutoff date. In preparation for that, we want to spend a little bit of time with you to go over some of the program information, the requirements of the program, but also cover some of the enhancements within this program that may be a benefit to you. And when I say to you, that means, cropland producers, livestock producers, and private forest landowners. Also, after the presentation, we want to have open discussion to cover any specific questions or concerns that you may have. We do not want you to leave with any unanswered questions. If we run out of time, we will make sure you have the proper contact information to follow up with us. And if you know of producers who couldn't make any of our sessions today, we'll be glad to follow up if necessary by phone. But like I said, for the meeting, we will be having an opportunity to ask for questions at the end of each of the enhancement, after discussion of the enhancements. This was a little bit different how we did the first session. And again, if anybody has any concerns, we could pause the recording while we address any discussion. And today's moderator is going to be Ken Lackman. Ken is our area program specialist for this area in Central Florida. And so with that, Ken, please proceed.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Walter. Just wanted to share a little bit of information about who we are in case you're not aware. NRCS provides technical and financial assistance to basically all landowners, farmers, ranchers, small operations, large operations. Our motto is helping people help the land. If you need any additional information, please follow up with your local NRCS office. And during the presentation, we will let you or show you how to find an NRCS office. That applies to Florida, but also if you have property in Alaska, this same link will work. The overall meeting agenda, I'm going to show you how to locate an NRCS office so you can get additional information. We're going to cover some information about CSP and some brief information about EQIP. Often people hear CSP and EQIP mentioned about the same time. Again, we'll do a brief overview between the two and show you how to find additional information on both. CSP application, discuss filling out the form. And CSP is a little different from EQIP. There is a producer map requirement. We'll discuss that. Then we're going to talk a little bit about CSP payments, then some CSP eligibility. And Then there will be 4 different presentations on enhancements from 4 different individuals within NRCS Area 3, and they'll be talking about some common enhancements that we use in this area, and then there'll be some questions, or there'll be opportunity to provide some questions. We hope there'll be questions. So if you do not know where your local NRCS office is, if you go to the NRCSUSDA.gov, there is a Contact Us button, and it will provide you with how to reach that individual. For this example, we went with Florida. We picked Manatee County, and as you can see, it gives you the contact number, gives you their address, gives you the individual to reach out for that office, and it also gives you their email address. With the drop-down menu, you can pretty much pick any state and it'll be there. I will let you know the website does change every couple of months, once a year maybe. So everything is usually in the same location, sort of, but if it does, the screenshots are not identical. It's just that there's been some slight changes, but they usually make it pretty easy to figure out how to get in touch with us. We wanted to stress this. After you identify the applicable office, the next step is really just reach out either by visiting them or stop by, make a phone call, set up an appointment. You do not need to understand CSP or any of the other Farm Bill programs prior to reaching out to NRCS for assistance. We are happy to meet with you, go over the information. The following information is presented just to provide you with additional information if you want to learn more prior to reaching out to NRCS. But I really want to stress the yellow highlighted area. Feel free to reach out to your NRCS person, tell them you're new to this program, and ask them to explain any of the questions you might have. So if you do want to learn more information, the same NRCSUSDA.gov website, there is Getting Assistance and Programs and Initiatives. And the program initiatives, the one we're going to be talking about today is the Conservation Stewardship Program. This is also, you can see there's the EQIP, there's a couple others, but we're focusing today on CSP. And part of the CSP website, there's a whole bunch of information. People like to hear about success stories from other individuals. If you click down here, it'll give you all kinds of success stories about how the program has helped individuals throughout the United States. But you can see there's enhancements, there's some fact sheets, there's all kinds of information on the website. Wanted to briefly cover the differences between EQIP and CSP since they're often talked about at the same time. And if you have additional information or additional questions, NRCS will gladly give you more detail. But EQIP basically is designed to address an existing resource concern. And a resource concern would be, say, controlling invasive species, improving livestock watering facility, and EQIP contracts can be anywhere from 1 to 5 years. CSP is more of a financial incentive to go above and beyond addressing the bare minimum resource concern. CSP is a 5-year only contract. You do not have the option of longer or less. There is a renewal option, which we'll briefly discuss at the very end of the meeting, but that's after the 5-year period. So if you are interested in applying for CSP, there is absolutely no obligation. It's just letting the particular office know that you're interested. And as Walter mentioned, this coming batching period currently is next Friday, March 24th. But if you go online, CSP application CPA 1200. Please make sure you have the right version, October 2021. When I did a Google search, I also noticed some of the older versions popped up. But you basically fill out the application and you're going to be doing Conservation Stewardship Program, but it also lists some of the others. And if you hear about a program in the future that isn't on it, they designed the form that you could actually write in a program that maybe came out after the form was updated, but it doesn't capture everything. I do want to point out this applicant decision maker. This is really supposed to be the person that's going to get the 1099. So if you're an individual and Ken Lackman Incorporated, then the applicant would be Ken Lackman Inc. and the decision maker might be Ken Lackman. But if you're an individual, it would be Ken Lackman. If you're Ken Lackman doing business as, and you're going to use a social security number, it would still be Ken Lackman as the decision maker and the applicant. But don't list yourself as the applicant if you don't want the 1099 going to yourself, and it should go to your entity. One of the unique things about CSP that's a little different from EQIP is CSP covers all of the property the participants involved with. So based on this, EQIP usually does one site, whereas CSP is looking at everything. So in order to make sure we address all of the property, we ask the participants to bring in a map that shows us that information. If you're not able to get the map, don't worry about it. Meet with NRCS. They can help you print out some maps, cover the different areas, and then you can provide them the information. But we're looking for physical property location. If there is no mailing address, identify maybe a major highway, section, township, and range. As much information about the property, fences, field boundaries, those type of things. Individual land uses. Is it used for cropland, hayland? Is it native range? We'll discuss the different land uses a couple slides from now. Acreage, any field numbers that you have. If you call that the bull pasture, or that's upland cropland 2, those type of information helps us so we can know when we're talking to you that we're talking about the same field. Land management is the entire operation in different counties, all operated by one person. Is each one operated separately? So there's different management. Is there different equipment? Is equipment shared? Some of that helps us with our definition of whether or not it would be one contract or two. Land control. It may be called ABC Ranch, but if your mom owns a portion of it and your brother owns a portion of it and some siblings own another portion, but it's all under ABC, just making sure that we have everybody that is the true landowner, we have their permission to sign up for a 5-year contract. And be mentioned a couple slides later, talking about making sure that there's leases for the life of the 5-year period. Cropping history, irrigation history, some of our requirements for our irrigation practices, you've got 2 out of the 5 years that you've got some sort of irrigation history. NRCS staff will go over that with you. Any other features, if you've got watering facilities out there, where the pipelines are located, if you're aware of underground cables, gas lines, some of that information helps if you're planning a prescribed burning. You want to make sure that you aren't burning into power lines or gas lines, that type of thing. So any knowledge that you have, greatly appreciated. Online with the CSP website, there is a fact sheet that does talk about the producer map, and it gives you some guidelines as far as providing the information we'll be looking for. Again, meet with NRCS. They're happy to work on this with you. Some of the terms you'll hear us toss out enhancements. That is basically you're building upon an existing practice, and we'll cover practice standards in a couple of slides. But it's increasing the level of conservation that you're applying. CART, another term you'll hear us use, that is our conservation assessment and ranking tool. And that's basically everybody is evaluated using CART, so everybody is evaluated the same. There's no special treatment for one person over the other. CART has standard questions that we answer, and that generates a score. Resource concern, you've probably heard it already. That identifies conservation issues or problems. Invasive species on the property, soil erosion, that type of deal. I mentioned earlier, we have land uses. That way we're all operating under the same definition. We classify cropland and hayland as cropland. So if you're growing hay majority of the time, but you occasionally graze it, we would call that hayland. If it's an introduced grass species and you predominantly graze it, but you occasionally cut hay on it, we would call that pasture land. Forest is basically tree growth, and it's managed for forestry products. We do have the range definition, and that becomes a discussion. If it's predominantly native range and it's used for wildlife and livestock, then that might be different from forest. But if it's a South Florida flatwoods and you're predominantly managing it for forest products, and you occasionally graze it and you do hunt it, then it would be probably classified as forest. Again, contact NRCS will help you with the definitions. Farmstead, those areas where headquarters, the barn, that type of stuff is located. Associated ag land, those are those little odd places that we have. You've got the corners on a center pivot, the little field strips between the farmstead and the cropland. You've got some active strips. Those are the type of areas that we associate or classify as associated ag land. And then, as mentioned, range is predominantly a native site, could be managed for forestry, could be managed for wildlife. Oftentimes, this far south of I-4, it's often managed for livestock and wildlife, but there is the occasional tree cut off of it. We had mentioned we were going to talk about payments. CSP is a little different from EQIP in that it has a minimum payment. So if you have a small 2-acre operation and your first payment with your enhancements and everything would be $1,000, it gets rounded up to $1,500. So as a minimum, you get the $1,500, and that could be for the 5-year period. If you have a larger operation, you're doing a lot of enhancements. This program does have a maximum payment of $200,000. That is over the life of the contract, and that does vary by each farm bill. So for example, CSP Classic, which is what we're talking about today, it has a separate $200,000 payment limitation from EQIP, which has a $450,000 payment. So if you're new to both programs, you could this year, if you're qualified and your operation meets all the criteria, you could have a $450,000 EQIP and a $200,000 CSP in the same year. You'd be eligible for $650,000. So one of the issues for CSP is the Farm Bill has outlined some eligibility requirements, and we work with our sister agency, the Farm Service Agency, and they help us confirm land control, adjusted gross income, and wetland information. And if you meet with NRCS first, we'll point you in the right direction as far as which FSA office to go to. If you do have a lease, they would be the ones that would ask for confirmation that the lease is for the life of the contract. They would work with you on the adjusted gross income. After NRCS receives the 1,200, we do have an environmental evaluation that we do perform. It's relevant to all the different federal laws, acts that we have to follow. So we address cultural resources, threatened endangered species, Food Security Act, and any other items that might be relevant to that area. If you're closer to the coast, closer to inland, next to a river, it all changes depending on the location of your operation. So after the application is evaluated, and when you get that, hey, we're going to pre-approve and move forward with a contract, and you decide you want to move forward, NRCS will ask for what we call an AD 1199A, and that gives us your bank routing information and your account numbers so that the payments can be made electronically. We usually don't ask for this information until after we have received pre-approval from our state office and we've notified you, and you've also said, yes, I want to move forward. So we've talked about enhancements. Just wanted to briefly cover the difference between an enhancement and a practice. NRCS, we'll go into that in a couple of slides. NRCS has specific practices, and they're basically designed to meet that resource concern. Maybe putting in a livestock watering system. So we have a practice standard that tells us all about how that practice should go in. An enhancement is to exceed the resource concern. Let's say you have a trough in and you're going to make that trough more wildlife friendly, or let's say you've got a fence and you're going to make it more wildlife friendly. So we have the practice standard for fence, and then we have the enhancements, which will be covered later on, to make that fence more wildlife friendly. And if you hear us talk about you've implemented the enhancement, that's basically when you've completed the information outlined on the enhancement sheet. And you will see several of those in the presentation from all the different individuals that are going to talk following me. So some examples of practices, NRCS practices: cover crop, conservation cover, conservation crop rotation, mulching, irrigation, water management. So that is the practice, and then the enhancement builds upon that. And we have lots of practices. And if you want to learn more about all the different enhancements and practices, you can go to the NRCS FOTG, and every state is listed. You pick Florida, then you would come over to what we call Section 4, which has all our practice standards and supporting documentation. And when you pick Florida, they would all show up. And let's say in this example, prescribed burning, when you click on it, this is our conservation practice standard. That's what CPS stands for. We're talking about CSP. This is CPS. And here's an example of one of our practice standards. I've got the first page and the last page, but it spells out all the information that's associated with prescribed burning. So, additional information about the enhancements. When you're on the CSP page, you'll see down here, I've blown it up under the enhancements and bundles. Go to the CSP page, scroll down, and how to get started, and click on the enhancements link. And when you get to the enhancements and bundles, if you scroll down, all the different enhancements are listed here. E stands for the enhancement. There's the practice code, and there's enhancement A, enhancement B, enhancement C. And there are numerous, as you will see. And this is a sample CSP enhancement page, listed page 1 and page 4, but it spells out all the criteria. You know exactly what's expected. There are no hidden things that you're not aware of. And here's an example for using 338, which is the prescribed burning. So here's the prescribed burning, our conservation practice. E stands for the enhancement. And in this case, I just pulled up 3 different. There is an A, a B, and a C. They're all centered around prescribed burning. And it gives you the land use and tells you the lifespan. And again, you'll see lots of that information from the following presentations that are coming up. We're going to transition. The next 4 individuals are going to go ahead and give a presentation on the different enhancements. And then, as Walter said, after each enhancement, which is a little different from what we did this afternoon, we're going to do a question period right after each enhancement. And then I should take it back. Walter, did you want to do after each enhancement or after each participant talks?
After each enhancement, because
okay.
Yeah, some are not, because they may vary the land use.
Okay.
And I do want to mention that the information that we showed you about where to find the practices and the enhancements, that is just for your information. You do not have to go in, you don't have to go there and do research on the practices or the enhancements. You can, if you would like to, but basically, if you're interested, all you have to do is apply for the program. Our staff goes out and they will advise you based on your operation what enhancements may suit you. We do want to go over the enhancements to give you an idea of the enhancements that are available out there. But I do want to point out that it's not, you don't have to go into our website and do research and come to us with kind of a plan. We'll help you, we'll help you get there. That's our job, to help you do that, work that planning with you.
Thank you, Walter, for stressing that. So each presenter, same as this afternoon, just let me know next slide. For this session, Walter is controlling the microphones versus last session. And when we finish up the enhancement, probably the next slide will show up and I'll just go back 1 and we'll ask if there's any questions. So Carolina, are you ready to go?
And hey everyone, I'm ready to go. All right, so my name is Carolina Luciano. I am a soil conservationist in the Plant City Field Office covering Hillsborough and Pinellas counties. And I'll be discussing some of the enhancements that we most commonly use in the office or are trying to implement. Next slide. Starting off with enhancement 528Q, use of body conditioning score for livestock on a monthly basis to keep track of herd health. So basically the criteria, the description under the criteria is body conditioning scoring is a numeric scoring system producers can use to consistently evaluate animals' estimated body energy reserve through degree of fatness. So this is a very useful management tool to monitor livestock performance with respect to current and recent feeding or grazing programs. This information can also be used to adjust feed or nutritional requirements to reach optimal body conditioning score. As you can see here, this enhancement has a lifespan of a year and can be used on multiple land uses, which means that you can receive the payment for implementing this practice every year of the contract. That is something that you and your designated NRCS representative decide to go for. We would give you an appendix, something like it's shown here on the right, that will help you determine what score you're gonna give each month. Next slide, please. So some of the criteria that you will be following prior to implementation, you will acquire a grazing management plan by NRCS. So we would go out there, verify what you're currently doing with your grazing, and if not, we will update that. And it's something that you will need to follow in order to implement this practice and develop a body conditioning score monitoring plan. During implementation, it's very important that you keep a record of livestock movement and body conditioning score of livestock type, breed, and phase of production. Keep records of supplemental feeding and take photos of livestock from several representative animals of the site with the entire animal in the picture, kind of like it's shown over here. Of course, it's not going to be as perfect, and that's completely fine. After implementation, provide a map of the paddocks used, forage animal balance sheet, if applicable, records of livestock movement, body conditioning score monitoring plan with the pictures. And the most important part is that if for some reason you're not able to follow the plan as written, just give us a call. It's easier that we help you through that problem rather than you calling us after the problem appeared and you fixed it. We're more than happy to go out there and assist you when you need that technical assistance during your contract. NRCS can and will provide that assistance to participants as requested prior to implementation or during. And with this, I kind of close this enhancement. So if anyone has any questions about this, now is a good time.
So, and while folks are thinking of questions, you know, the importance of the enhancements is that, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning, you know, CSP is one of the programs that we use to implement conservation on the ground, but also one that recognizes producers for previous conservation efforts. And so basically, as part of becoming eligible for a program, you have to agree to do at least one enhancement for that land use. Once you do that enhancement, that opens you to receive payments for, you know, the land use for your type of land use. And then based on when we do the conservation assessment and we assess how many resource concerns you are meeting, you will also get a payment. Those will be $300 per resource concern met at the time of the contract. So you get $300 for each resource concern per year. But again, that's what doing this enhancement is what's opens you up to be able to get those other payments. Just a kind of quick comment is last year when we did this, we covered land uses and then enhancements for each land use. But then since many enhancements were applicable to land uses, different land uses, we ended up repeating enhancements and making the presentation longer. So this year we're just trying to do enhancements and then let you all know what applicable land uses are. And lastly, as I know there was a few folks that signing late, that, you know, if anybody has any questions and don't want to be necessarily recorded, I would gladly pause the recording while we address the question and then continue it, or you could just put your question on the chat. So thank you.
Walter, okay to move to the next slide?
If no questions, yes, you may proceed, Carolina.
All right. If not, as questions come to mind, maybe later, you can just type them in the chat and we'll address them at the end as well. This is not your only chance for that. So up next, we have enhancement 327A, conservation cover for pollinators and beneficial insects. This is a fairly easy enhancement that can also be used in every land use. And it does have a lifespan of 5 years. So what that means is that it can only be implemented one time during the contract and you will receive that payment that one time, but you can break it up so that it's easier for you if that's something that you want to do. Let's say you have 40 acres of crop and some of associated ag land. You don't need to do it all at the same time, so you can break it up and kind of do 2 to 3 acres 1 year, etc. So the description on this would be seed or plot nectar and pollen producing plants in non-crop areas such as field borders, vegetative barriers, contour buffer strips, grass waterways, shelter belts, hedgerows, windbreaks, conservation cover, and riparian forests and herbaceous buffers. Next slide, please. Some of the criteria we have for this enhancement is that habitat areas must be at least 0.5 acres for each 40 acres of the selected land use. If you have less or more than 40 acres, we will do the conversion for you, and it's a very small percentage of what would be that requirement. The habitat planting will include as a minimum 3 early, 3 mid, and 3 late flowering species from the NRCS state list, including forbs, legumes, vines, shrubs, and or trees. This is so that our native insects and pollinators have that food available for them almost all year round. Site selection should consider existing weed pressures and available methods of control. Delay planting if high weed pressure requires aggressive treatment. Site preparation and plant establishment shall be accomplished according to the appropriate NRCS conservation practice and specifications. So we would go out there, we will evaluate your site, and we will help provide the seed plan to make this pollinator habitat efficient. So let's say, for example, you have a very wet area and you think that it might not work. We work with our state biologists and the Xerces Society to determine the plants that would thrive there so that you can plant in that area as well. Next slide, please. Successful establishment is when the planting provides at least 80% soil cover when visually estimated, and the resultant cover consists primarily of the early, mid, and late blooming species planted for pollinators and other beneficial insects. Insecticides should not be used in the habitat planting area. So if we have a field border near a cropping area that you use insecticides for, that's important to know when we go out there during that first visit so that we can plan accordingly and maybe not plant so close and leave a buffer area. Herbicides are allowed during site preparation prior to planting if necessary to eliminate competing weeds from planting area. And management and maintenance activities such as mowing, haying, burning, or grazing must be conducted outside of the growing season or bloom periods. Maintenance should be done on less than a third of the acreage during any given year, except during the first year post-planting. So yeah, for this enhancement, the part that is most work intensive would be the prepping, but after that, it's just maintaining it. And like I mentioned in the beginning, you can separate that in smaller plots so that it's easier, and we will make it work for you. And as always, the most important thing is to call us. If, for example, you cannot find some type of seed or plant, just call us and we will work with you to make it achievable. And with this, I close this enhancement. If anyone has any questions now. I don't see anything in the chat either. So I'm gonna proceed, but like I said, you can always just type them in the chat and we will address them. So for the cover crop enhancements, we have different enhancements under this practice. So it will be up to your designated NRCS conservationist and to you to decide which one fits best with your operation and research concerns. Today, I will be discussing a common one we have been using in the Hillsborough County for our strawberry growers, E340F. So next slide, please. E340F would be cover crop to minimize soil compaction. Tilling the ground, yearly we risk an issue of soil compaction, and this is a very easy enhancement and way to help with our soil health. The official description would be to establish a cover crop mix that includes plants with both fibrous root and deep rooted system. And you can kind of see the rest over there, but cover crops shall not be harvested, grazed, or burned. And in order to meet that description, we will look out for cover crops that do. For example, I have here from strawberry fields to sun hemp and cowpea cover crop. Both of those cover crops have a taproot system that's big enough and they break soil compaction. So it will meet that minimum of 4 inches deep. Some of the criteria that we have here is selecting species that are compatible with other components of the cropping system, ensure herbicides used with crops are compatible with cover crop selections. Cover crops may be established between successive production crops, companion planted or relay planted into production crops. And select species and planting dates that will not compete with production crop yield or harvest. Obviously, we don't want to mess with your primarily crop, so that's more than understandable. We do want to help you maintain your soil health, so that's why this is such a good enhancement. For this one, we pay $14.71 per acre, which is a really good payment on top of that yearly payment that Walter was addressing earlier for the research concerns. And as always, if you encounter some issue with finding the seeds, just give us a call and we can change the plan. But it's easier to do this once you encounter that problem rather than later. Any questions with this enhancement?
Carolina, yes, there are some questions on the chat.
Okay, let's see.
Can you see the chat? There are two. Zoom user has a question related to this enhancement. And then Mr. Black has a question related to the previous slide. He posted the question, we just missed it until.
Okay, for some, I don't know, I'm able to see the chat, but the last thing that I can see was your answer about the music at the beginning.
So, okay, the question is, one of the questions related to this enhancement, does financial help cover only seeds or does it help with equipment and irrigation too?
So for this one, it's only seeds, and our payment does describe.
Actually, I
it
think it
takes
was
into consideration.
Pardon me. I think they meant for it's a pollinator enhancement. The question is related to the pollinator enhancement.
Oh, okay.
Does it help cover only seeds, or does it help with equipment and irrigation too?
Not with irrigation, but our payments do take into consideration the labor that goes into that. And depending on what type of system you have, we can also help you with the prepping of the pollinator habitat, but that will be up to your designated planner to decide if that will be needed in order to achieve the pollinator habitat. But that is something that you could mention if you're interested in that and you have a designated conservationist going out asking if they can also include that site prep practice. Because at the end of the day, it's up to that threshold that we need to meet for the CSP. So it's definitely something that your designated conservationist can look into. But irrigation is not included in the payment, I believe.
Okay, and then we have another question related to the pollinator habitat. What would be the what would be the conversion for a larger land use, for example, 500 acres?
Yes, I have that here. One quick minute. I think it was, I have here that I wrote down about 1% of the total land, 1.5. So it would be that conversion. It's a very small footage. So it's a good way to get into that stewardship threshold. If, for example, you are not meeting the resource concern for wildlife, it's a fairly easy practice to establish and in a small footprint in order for you to meet that threshold, get your annual payment and get the payment to establish the pollinator habitat. So it would be 1.25, 1.5%, if I'm not mistaken.
I calculated it would be 6.25 acres for 500 acres. They will have to do 6.25 acres.
Yep, so for 100 acres, yep, that's seems fairly doable. And like I said, it doesn't need to be contiguous. It can be broken down into separate plots depending on your on what you have in your land. So yeah, can definitely be done.
Then we have another question related to the cover crop. Is the cover crop just to avoid erosion?
No, for not for this one. For this one and this description that I'm presenting here that I had in the other slide is to help with soil compaction. But as you can see here, we do have some cover crops, some enhancements that will help with soil erosion. So once your designated conservationists go out there, if you have erosion issues, we do have an enhancement for that. You might be required to plant more than one species, and the species has different requirements. For example, for soil compaction, it needed to be at least 4 inches deep, that taproot system, obviously to help break down the compaction in the soil. So it may have some different descriptions, but we will help you and we will tell you which plants are available to do that.
Yes, and if the species planted meets the criteria of compaction, it's better to go the route of using the compaction enhancement because it pays higher than soil erosion. So if it meets that criteria, you could still use it. You will have the soil erosion benefit, and it pays a little more than the soil erosion.
Yep. And if you have erosion on one plot but not in another, you can do both, not on the same footprint, but you can do both if you have erosion, let's say on plot 1, but not on plot 2. So you can do both.
One last question, Carolina, just on the question of 500 acres. So if they have to do 6.25 acres for 500 acres, can they be together, a plot of 6.5, or they need to be split throughout?
No, they can be together or they could be split. That's up to the producer to decide how they want to do it.
All right, thank you.
As long as we do keep it, for example, there's a cropland like strawberries or something else, and you use insecticides, we do need to take that into consideration and keep that buffer there. But other than that, it's up to the producer to decide how they're gonna achieve those 6.25 acres.
Thank you. That was all the questions.
All right. So, oh, I think that was my last slide. Can you go to the other one? Yep, so here just finishing up, I forgot about the last slide of cover crop, I apologize. So we have some extra information and you can keep asking questions if they come up with this, no problem at all. But important to not burn the cover crop residue, not harvest or graze the cover crop, and select a mix of cover crop species that include plants with both fibrous root and deep-rooted systems. So again, remember this is for the enhancement to address soil compaction. Okay, so now we can move on. All right, so for E315A, herbaceous weed treatment to create desired plant communities consistent with the ecological site. So the description for this one is mechanical, chemical, or biological herbaceous weed treatment will be used to control targeted herbaceous weeds to create, release, or restore desired plant communities that are consistent with achievable ecological site steady state descriptions. So for this one is applicable for pasture, range, forest, and associated agland. And the lifespan is 5 years as well. So that means that you can do it only once in the life of the contract, but you can split it if you like as well. Some of the criteria would be herbaceous weed treatment will be applied to achieve the recorded desired level of control of targeted weed species and protect the recorded desired species within the plant community. NRCS will not develop biological or chemical recommendations except biological control by grazing animals. So grazing, we do provide grazing plans, obviously, but when it comes to selecting chemical or biological recommendations, that is going to be up to a technical service provider or to follow criteria from the Florida University. We cannot recommend which chemical to use to which weed. Ecological site descriptions, state and transition models will be employed in development of treatment specifications that are ecologically sound and defensible. So same thing, we will follow what's described, what's recommended by the Florida University and other institutions, but we cannot recommend the treatment that's the chemical that's going to be applied. When herbicides are used, environmental hazards and site-specific application criteria listed on the pesticide label must be followed. It's extremely important. Next slide, please. So here at the right side, you can see the treatment of Caesar weed and slash pine spores, and then under hardwood hammock. Access to treated or targeted area will be controlled based on management methods applied on restrictions as listed on chemical labels. Prior to implementation, develop a map indicating areas to be treated as part of the management plan. So once we go out there, your designated conservationist will have a map, and we might walk through it with you, but at the end, you are responsible of telling us where the invasives are present so that we can calculate the acres that should be treated. During implementation, notify NRCS of any plan changes to verify changes meet our enhancement criteria. That cannot be stressed enough. During implementation, keep records of all treatments, including application method, timing, and amount applied as recommended by NRCS or a technical service provider. So this enhancement is usually good after, even if you haven't done an EQIP project with us, but if you have done invasive treatment with us, this could be good to reapply maybe some of the regrowth that you have. But even if you haven't participated with us in the past, just give us a call. You might be eligible to treat some of the herbaceous weeds that you have with CSP. And with that, I don't think I have anything else for this one. So if we have any questions. All right, I think we're good to move on. If not, just keep typing them in the chat and we will address them. Thank you, everyone.
Next on the list is Dan Shabilian. Walter, did you unmute his mic?
You should be muted. I never muted anybody, so
okay.
Good to go.
Yeah, this is Dan Shabilian. Hope you can hear me. I'm the district conservationist from the Wauchula field office, and I cover Hardee and DeSoto counties. And I'm going to discuss 3 enhancements. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the E5280. It's a prescribed grazing enhancement, clipping mature forages to set back vegetative growth for improved forage quality. So this is an enhancement that you would apply on pasture land in late summer when the grass is just growing game busters, and you'd mow it down to the recommended height for the forage, and that would improve the forage quality. And part of this, you would need to have a written prescribed grazing plan, and you'd have to do the normal prescribed grazing as well, where you keep records of when you are rotating the cows, the grass heights when you're putting the cows in, and the grass heights when you're taking the cows out of a field. Next slide, please. Yes, so the participant would work with NRCS to establish some photo points where they would take pictures of the grass heights, before the clipping or the mowing, and then after the clipping and mowing. They would keep the records of the clipping heights, and then they would take a photo of the area immediately before and after the clipping, and they would notify NRCS when after the clipping as well. And this enhancement pays $39.86 an acre. So it can be a pretty good enhancement. A lot of ranches have been interested in this enhancement. Next slide, please. Okay, the E472A. Oh wait, I should ask. Any questions? Yeah. Any questions?
Walter, any questions?
No, I guess I just point out that I think Dan mentioned that a prescribed grazing plan is needed. If the producer doesn't have one, we will help them develop that plan, and that practice prescribed grazing can be included also on and paid for under the CSP.
Yes. Yep. Okay, the E472A is to manage livestock access to water bodies to reduce nutrients or pathogens to surface water. So this would be installing a fence to keep the livestock out of a creek or a pond or some other water body to improve the water quality. It also needs a written prescribed grazing plan. And then if you are going to, and then you'd have to keep records of the cows as they're turned in and out of the areas. This enhancement pays $2.88 a foot for the fence. And this could be a good enhancement if you're trying to reach your threshold for water quality. It would definitely give you some credit there to either meet or exceed a resource concern. So next slide, please. So yeah, the producer would have to get a grazing plan with NRCS. And let's see, and you'd have to keep grazing records, and you could graze, the excluded area. If you had a riparian or something, you could, kind of flash graze it or graze it at a kind of a quicker interval or something like that. Yeah. Okay, are there any questions on this enhancement? The access control enhancement?
Walter, any on your end?
No, I'm good.
Oh yeah, I should point out, with that, you could also, NRCS, if you needed an alternative watering source, like a livestock watering system, that NRCS could help with that as well, either having that be a practice item in the CSP contract, or you could have a separate equip application for like a livestock watering system. Okay, next slide, The E381A is silvopasture to improve wildlife habitat. Yeah, so this would be if you had pasture that was just, just forage, and you're interested in improving the wildlife habitat by planting some trees or shrubs. Let's see. Yeah, the trees or the species must be adapted to the site and compatible with the management system. You would have a prescribed grazing plan that NRCS would write for you as well. And then you have to protect, the trees or the shrubs from grazing. You can see in this picture that they have an electric fence, a temporary electric fence that will be maintained. Yes, right there, yeah, until the trees get to an adequate height. Yeah, let's see. You can go on to the next slide, please. Now, this enhancement pays $83.27 an acre to establish, the lines of trees or shrubs. Let's see. Yeah, I've had a producer that did this enhancement as part of a CSP contract where he planted a couple of acres of trees a year. The trees that he planted in 2020 are about 10 feet tall. They're slash pines. Yeah, so he's pretty happy with that for the wildlife benefits, and also that it provides some shade, or will provide some shade for his livestock in the future. Are there any questions? That's not how you spell pasture land.
Next up will be Derek, unless there are any questions on your end, Walter.
Nope, I'm good. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Derek Wiley. I'm the District Conservationist in the Cocoa Field Office, serving Brevard and Seminole counties. Next slide. Next slide, please. First enhancement I'll speak about is E382A, incorporating wildlife-friendly fencing for connectivity of wildlife food resources. I think you may have skipped ahead one slide. Thank you. So applicable land uses are pasture, range, forest, and associated ag land. Ken, can you go back to the slide with the applicable land uses, please?
Do you see it?
Yes, now I do. So the description is retrofitting or constructing fences that provide a means to control movement of animals, people, and vehicles, but minimizing impacts to wildlife movement. Next slide, please. So what are we talking about with wildlife-friendly fencing? What are the management objectives? Why do we have the fence here? What are the wildlife species of concern? What kind of wildlife cannot get through, around, or over this fence? And therefore, what is it about that makes it not wildlife friendly? And where do we need the modification to occur? So if you have an extremely tall fence in my picture here, it's a woven wire fence with a barbed wire strand at the top that's upwards of 54 inches off the ground, and the woven wire is extremely close to the ground. So this fence is going to be difficult for both animals to jump over or crawl under. Smaller animals that may need to crawl under can't do that. So now they've got a barrier that they can't come and go through that fence. Next slide, please. So examples of our wildlife friendly techniques you can use on your fences include raising the bottom on a strand fence, raising the bottom wire height and changing it to smooth wire. So animals that go below the fence can go under it safely. And you could also incorporate lowering the top wire height and increasing the spacing to the second wire for animals who jump. Deer, when they jump, have this kickback leg thing they do. And if the top two wires are too close together, that's what can cause entanglements as they try to jump the fence. Converting portions of a woven wire or field fence to strand fence, and understanding that we have lanes where we need tight control of animals, but if there's a spot along that fence near a gate where you could stop and start and incorporate some strands so that animals coming down the road can just dodge the gate through a little bit of strand and then continue on with woven wire, so you still have that stronger fence if you're using that to move animals. Similarly, if you know about specific corridors that wildlife are using where you always see them jump the fence or get entangled in the fence or have to move around the fence, you can incorporate lay down fence, which is a portion of the fence that's not permanently attached to the posts. So at the time, seasonally or as needed, if the animals are not in that field, you can lay that fence down on the ground, and then the animals can just, the wildlife can just walk right over it. This also helps prevent damage to your fence if you're having issues with animals actually mangling your fence trying to get through it. Another opportunity aside from physically altering your fence is avoiding nesting season for when you're clearing fence lines of vegetation, whether you're like to mow your fence lines or spray herbicide. There could be a window of time where you don't do those operations to allow for ground nesting birds and other animals that use the ground to raise young to use your fence line as a safe harbor. Next slide, but I think I may be on the question portion.
Anybody on your end, Walter? It seems you were able to read the chat.
Let me check real quick. I don't think so. No new questions.
Okay, next we have 511A, harvest of crops, hay or small grains using measures that allow desired species to flush or escape. Again, this is a wildlife enhancement. Like others have mentioned, that is one of the resource concerns you're going to be assessed on. And the more resource concerns you're meeting or exceeding by doing these enhancements, the better your annual payment will be. So some of these are easy to incorporate and garner you a small payment, but also garner you additional credit on your stewardship threshold. So this applies to crop, both annual and perennial crops, as well as pasture and range, if those areas are cut for hay. So we're talking about harvesting crops using measures that allow desired species to be flushed or to escape and avoid being injured by that equipment. So that may include the timing or idling portions of that land, or applying certain techniques during the harvesting that reduce mortality to wildlife. Next slide, please. These are the general criteria that we talk about for harvesting hay and small grains. We understand that there are periods of time that you have to cut hay and you have to ted hay and you have to harvest grain. You can't always vary those periods because the quality can change dramatically. But if there is an opportunity to time those harvests to benefit desired wildlife, we may want to modify those, provided it's not a huge detriment to your operation as a whole. And so we'll talk about harvest schedules or cover patterns and varying the plant height to allow suitable habitat to remain after and during the harvesting operation. Next slide, please. So in order to meet the objectives of this enhancement, you must apply and maintain at least 2 of the following 3 management actions. So do not cut hay, as in leave uncut hay on at least 1/3 of the hay acres each year. You may do that, it doesn't have to be the eastern third. It can be strips or blocks that you periodically skip, as so long as they're 30 feet wide, or for at least 1/3 of the hay acreage, use measures that allow desired species to flush or escape. We'll have some examples of that. It's patterning, choosing different haying and harvesting patterns, or modifying your equipment with flush bars to spook wildlife away before they go into the business end of your equipment. Also increasing the forage heights after mowing. So cutting your hay not as low, cutting it a little higher to, again, allow wildlife species to use that hay acres, those hay acres. Next slide, please. Here's more criteria that must be met to improve harvest method for wildlife. And this applies to harvesting activities that occur during the nesting or fawning season. Again, you must choose 2 of the following 3. Attach a flush bar to the mower. That would be something on the leading edge of the harvester, the swather, whatever it is, that's going to harmlessly bump wildlife away before they go into the piece of equipment. Conducting all your harvesting during daylight hours or beginning the harvest pattern on one end of the field and work back and forth across the field, or in the center of the field and work outward in an increasing spiral. The main problem wildlife face and can cause wildlife injury is when you harvest in a decreasing spiral, they can tend to flush towards the unharvested area. And as we go round and round and round and harvest, they just get concentrated in the center where they finally meet the piece of equipment. So altering that pattern, you can choose, again, 2 of these 3 things, altering that to protect wildlife. I believe that's the last slide on E511A, if there's any questions. Okay. Next slide, please. 612G, this is a tree and shrub planting for wildlife habitat. So applicable land uses are forest and associated ag land. So we're talking about putting trees in land use of forestry or in out areas associated with the agricultural operation. So we're going to be planting trees and shrubs to provide diversity, structure, and composition needed to enhance habitat and forage for identified wildlife species, birds, pollinators, all these things. If you have an area that's disused and you could just plant some trees there, you can get some credit for addressing wildlife habitat on those forest or associated ag land uses. Next slide, please. So the criteria for the design of the planting is that there will be a minimum of 5 species of trees and shrubs used. You need at least 1 tree and 1 shrub. So that may be 4 trees and 1 shrub, or 4 shrubs and 1 tree, or 3 and 2, some sort of mix. The groups will be managed for growth and visual appear and proximity to areas of wildlife use. If this is an isolated area, it may not be the most appropriate place to throw some trees and shrubs up if it's disconnected from other usable wildlife habitat nearby. Selection should be chosen according to this natural disturbance regime and selected based on traits and status, structure, and composition that suits the site. And we want to build forest resilience by favoring existing species that are better adapted to future climatic conditions and enhance the relative compositional and structural diversity. So we want, really, that's a nice way to say, we want it to work. We want to use species that are going to work on that site, not just be oddballs. That there's going to be animals and wildlife associated to using those species that are adapted to the site, all these sorts of things. And of course, no planting of species on any federal or state invasive species or noxious weed list. I believe that's the last slide. So any questions, please.
Anything on your end, Walter?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Derek. Next up, Philip.
Sir, so my name's Philip Dixon. I'm the area resource conservationist for the Palmetto area office. Our office that where Walter and Ken and I work, we cover from the Tampa area to Cocoa Beach, north of Brooksville, and south to Sarasota to Charlotte County. So we cover a large area, large of livestock, cattle production, rangeland, and several crop species, watermelon, strawberries, especially in Plant City. So that's kind of the stuff that we work with more than anything. So enhancements I'm going to go over today are the beef cattle and some forestry enhancements that we can do. So let's go on to the next slide, Ken. Next slide. So here's the first thing. This enhancement is called snag or den tree creation or maintenance. So if you see these dead trees, that's in a very typical rangeland sites that we have here in this part of Florida. We have these range sites where they don't grow the best grass, but they do grow range. And so what you would do on this for this enhancement is you would just, if you have these trees, you just leave them. You wouldn't cut them, you'd leave them and maintain them the life of the contract, which is 5 years. And then you can get a renewal for 5 years after that, hopefully. But anyway, so that's what this practice is. It's about 7 trees per acre. I'll show you in a minute the breakdown. But if you don't have dead trees like this, then what we do, we girdle them or we treat them. We'll treat them we'll take a hatchet and go around the base of them and then spray some chemical on them, and they'll slowly die. It takes them about 5 or 6 years before they die, but as long as they're standing, the wildlife will use it. And we don't pick the best trees in the forest. We still want to grow those for commercial production. We pick the low value trees or some damaged trees or something like that. But most times you'll see people have enough of these dead trees, especially since a hurricane in their area. Next slide, Ken. So this is the actual enhancement. This is the sheet that you'll fill out to get this practice. So it's called E660, and the criteria for this is you've got to be in forest land, associated ag land, or farmstead. I don't say rangeland, but anyway. So you just identify the woodland species where the den trees or coarse woody debris. You manage for specific tree species that, like you may have pine trees or you may have live oaks or that kind of trees. So you would create, recruit, or maintain sufficient snags. When you try to identify the trees where you're going to create or maintain, you'd identify the ones that you want, planned purpose, whatever. A lot of times we will suit these trees for what type of wildlife we have in the area. And we're looking at determine density. If you got a lot of trees or a small amount of trees, that will determine which trees that we mark for the snag creation. The price of this enhancement is $52.79 an acre. So if you have 100 acres of forest land on your farm, then you do this to the entire 100 acres, you get $5,200. Next slide, Ken. So this is the actual form that you fill out. So if you look to the chart shows how many trees that you do per acre. So it says 6 to 10 inch, 2 or more, 10 to 20 inch, 2 or more, greater than 20 inch, 2. And it says large, greater than 20 is 1, and 1 brush pile. If you don't have the large trees, then we would cut back to the smaller trees. But it looks like it's around 7 trees and a brush pile. The brush pile work good for the smaller species, the rabbits, the ground squirrels, also turkey. Turkey like to bed in brush piles. So this is all per acre. You do it one time, and then you're done for the 5 years, and until you get that payment. The main thing after you to get payment for this practice, you would mark the trees that either you're going to count as a snag or that you're going to create one by killing. You'd mark them with some paint, take a picture of them, and then you don't take a picture of all of them, but you take a picture of what represents the acres you have, and then that would be your documentation. We will come out there and we'll look at the trees and kind of verify that that's what you've done, and that's pretty much it. It's a pretty easy practice. Once you do it, and it'll last. This program is 5 to 10 years, but this lasts 20 to 30 years for the wildlife benefits. Next slide, Ken. And this is pretty typical. This is what happened to a lot of our trees after the hurricane. We've got these standing dead pines. The tops of them are blowout. The top of the one to the left is a good good one for black bear. Will get in that thing. It'll rot out in the center of that tree, and a black bear will actually climb in that and get in that in the wintertime. That's usually where they hibernate more in these trees than any part of the forest that there is. Next slide. Okay, any questions on snag creation or den trees? Okay, next slide again. Forest end thinning. Next slide. This is a practice, pretty typical if you have some pines planted or a lot of thick trees. So at this site, this is before picture. So you see the blue marking on the trees. So this is a site that they're going to take out those trees. Those trees here are kind of big, so they're probably going to market those. And what'll happen, they'll open up the canopy below it. When you open up the canopy, more sunlight will get to the bottom of the ground. And so what you'll have more forbs, more grass species will grow, and that will be more food for your wildlife. And so you have more food. And you also, the trees you do leave will grow faster because they'll have less competition for sunlight. Next slide, Ken. So this is the enhancement sheet that you will complete. It pretty much just tells us what you're going to do: reduce forest stand density to create open stand structure. And so you just, in essence, you develop a forestry management plan, which we will get the plan developed for you. Either we'll do it for you, or we'll put you in contact that someone will do it for you, and we'll cost share that as well. So you develop a forestry management plan that kind of tells you what species you want to take out and how much. We usually try to thin the stand to a target basal area of 50 to 60 square feet per acre. And that creates an open stand. It stimulates growth of herbaceous vegetation on the forest floor. And you hopefully you move the unhealthy trees, and then the good trees are left to grow and profit you later. Here are just some considerations to do on the right. When you cut the trees, make sure you don't damage any of your other trees. You don't cut the trees during the time when you have heavy insect or disease population buildup. We don't have much soil erosion here in Florida because we're so flat, but that'd be one thing you would do in other states. Next slide, Ken. Okay, so the price for this enhancement is $322 an acre. This, if you have a pine acreage, say you have 100 acres and you do this on all 100 acres, then you get $322 per acre. So that'd be $32,000 that you get for this one enhancement. And like Walter and Ken said, you only have to do one enhancement to qualify for CSP. And so this could be the one, and then you're good for 5 years. Next slide, Ken. Here's kind of what it looks like after. There are some blue trees in there. They still got to cut some marks, but you can see it's more open. You can see there's a lot more grass, and the height of the grass and the briars that's underneath it is excellent food now for your wildlife, and you have cover. Next slide, Ken. Any questions on the forestry thinning process enhancement? Walter, you have to keep up with that. I can't see the chat, so. Okay, hearing none, we'll go to the next slide.
Yes, give me a second. There's a question on the chat. Does that program remove the roots too?
The forest thinning, is that the one you're talking about?
I believe so. The question was posted at 7:29.
Okay, it's for
now follow up, or does seed leave stumps?
We leave the stump, yes. We leave the stump, but you can take them out. But when you leave the stumps, especially pine trees, they're not coming back. They're rotting, and then that rotting tree will you have organic carbon that'll be back in your soil, and you'll have some species that will use that tree for food and cover. You can, I mean, if you want to, like this is pretty clean here, so they cut it right at the top of the ground on this side here. But if you want to, that's up to you if you want to take them out. but we don't pull them out of the ground. We want less erosion. So yeah, we usually leave the stump, but not high, not like, 2 or 3 foot high. It's just right atop the ground. That answer your question? Okay, I guess we'll go to the next. Oh, is that all the questions, Walter?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, it says 4 in the chat. Okay, we'll go to the next though. So the last one I'm going to cover is management intensive rotation grazing. This is a very could be very useful in this part of Florida. Next slide, Ken. So this is pretty typical in Florida, not this time of year, but it could be. It could be. It's a lot of grass, a lot of forage. The main thing we got to have in Florida is a little water. We got a little rain during the winter months. We don't get enough, but we do have some farms that have grass like this right now. Not many, but they are some high managers, I call them. And so this enhancement is if you got paddocks or fields and you have 4 to 8 paddocks or fields and you rotate your cows or livestock around and you want to improve your management, because we can show you how to produce more grass with the same cows or even more cows, just as long as you rotate them and you let your grass rest. The key to growing grass is to let it rest and let it grow. It's just like cutting hay. You let the grass grow, then you harvest the hay when you allow the cows to graze it. So if you look at grass like that, then you can have grass high and you just harvest it. And so that's what this enhancement here is for the higher manager. If you're just started, then that's fine. But if you want to go up to the next level and have more grass, better grass, you have better body condition scores for your cows. The cows will be fatter, they'll be healthier, they'll breed back a lot easier. Your calves will be bigger at weaning. They'll weigh more. You'll get more money for each calf, which means more profit for you, just from simple changing your management. The next slide, Ken. So this is the enhancement sheet for the management intensive rotational grazing. So the first thing we do is just like Dan was talking about on the grazing plan. So you get with our range specialist or grazing specialist, and we'll develop you a grazing plan on your farm. And then the grazing plan, it'll tell what you do, inventory, what you have, your cows, your forage, how many tons you're producing now, how many paddocks. It'll have a listing of your fences, your watering systems, where you feed cows, all your grasses. And so it's an inventory. And then we see how you're managing, how you're moving your livestock. And so then we develop a plan to increase your stock density, shorten the grazing periods, and enhance the plant recovery. And also we put in some deferment where you have non-grazing periods where you allow the grass to grow. And so this is a proven process. I've done this for 30 years, this rotational grazing. It works. It works. The only people making money out of rotational grazing is the farmer. And that's the reason you don't see a lot of companies pushing this, is because the farmer gets the money just from management, just allowing the plant to grow in a natural state and letting it produce what it can. The price for this is $49 an acre, and it's another $2 or $3 for the practice, so about $50 an acre. So if a person has say 1,000 or 500 acres, and they do intensive rotation management on 500 acres, that'd be $25,000 that you'll get on the CSP payment, which is very simple, and you don't buy anything. It's just more management is all it is. Next slide, Ken. And this is pretty typical. This is what we want. This is and all these pictures that we have here are from Florida. These are pictures that we have out in the fields, and this is a lot of grass, but this is what we want to see. Hopefully year round in Florida. We don't see it a lot, but there are farms that have this, and we can show you some farms that are working now, and the cow density is higher, but they're rotating a lot. It's a different kind of mindset. But anyway, this enhancement will kind of train you on that. Next slide, Ken. So here's the sheet you actually fill out. So what you do to get your payment, you get your grazing plan, and you just have to show that you've been following your grazing plan. So you would have written grazing records that show, like when you have your cows, you move them to field number 1, You'll put field number 1, you'll measure the height of the grass when they go in, you take a picture of it. When the cows come out, you do the same thing, measure it, how long they've been in there, and then take a picture. You don't do it every time, but you get to do it where you're in a cycle where you know how you're moving your cows, and that's your documentation. And you take a picture, and that's pretty much it. You're gonna do that, and just keep up your records and take pictures. That's pretty much all you have to do. But you do have to do different management. But to actually get the cost share payment is very easy. It's just a little record keeping. Like I say, CSP, or the Conservation Stewardship Program, very easy program. That I think I've been doing it for over 20 years, and all the farmers that I work with, every one of them do not have a problem with. They like it because it's an incentive-based program that rewards the better farmers. Next slide, Ken. That's all I have. Any questions on the grazing management?
Thank you, Philip. Walter, anything on your end?
Yes, I wanted to, to cover a little bit on, how is it that producers get payments? It is, I'm going to provide some examples. I do ask you that you have to keep in mind that, this is why we cannot give estimates ahead of time. It's going to depend on, when we do the conservation assessment, on the number of resource concerns that are determined that you are meeting. So for example, if let me try to share my screen here. Before we go to that, if you guys, if anybody wants to apply for the program, all you have to do is contact these folks. These are your local district conservationists, and basically call them and ask them you want to apply for the Conservation Stewardship Program. They'll get you an application. They could take an application over the phone. They can mail it, email it to you. We'll put that slide back again.
You want me to stop sharing, Walter, or will you override?
Let's see, is it, can you guys see my screen with the Florida cost estimator?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
So for example, this is an example here of payments for a 100-acre pasture operation that is going to be doing the body conditioning score and the prescribed grazing practice. And this is what we meant, that when you do these enhancements, it opens you to receive these payments here that are orange in this cost estimator. The existing payment land use, that is basically, that's taking 100 acres times $3 per acre. Then this is the one, this second one here, the EAP2, is the one that will change also depending on the resource concerns. For this case, we are we're doing an example on an operation. We're assuming that this operation is going to be meeting at least 5 resource concerns at the time of the contract. It could be a little bit less, it could be more. So, each resource concern adds $300 to that year. So that's what you see, $1,500 per year is that 5 resource concerns times 300. So, so based on that, this 100-acre operation will be receiving a total of $10,524 for that 5-year contract. And that is doing the body conditioning score and the practice for 4 years. we try not to schedule the practice on the first year because we could have complications with producers having time to getting it done. These resource concerns, let me see if I could show, let's see. So when we do an assessment, the assessment is questions that the planner has to go and discuss with you, and based on all those questions, we get a report that says, if a resource concern was met or not met, and that's where that number 5, in this case, is 7. In the example that I gave, it's 5 because we wanted to be a little more conservative. But in this example, this operation met 7 at the time of the contract. So that person was going to get 7 times 300 added to that annual payment. If it's a 500-acre operation, I believe I have to update then 500 on each. So on a 500-acre operation, basically their payment would go to $22,620 over those 5 years for doing that body conditioning score and prescribed grazing. One thing that we did not mention too is that at the end of the 5 years, there's typically an opportunity for you to renew that contract and enroll for 5 more years, and then do another enhancement, which is one of the things that we don't recommend people to go with a lot of enhancements at the beginning, so that number one, to test the program and see if it's something that is working for you, and then you have an opportunity to enroll. So to give an example then on cropland. This is an example on a 50-acre cropland operation that we were planning to do the cover crop practice and the cover crop enhancement. And in this operation, we are assuming that, for purposes of this example, we're assuming that they are meeting 4 resource concerns at the time of the contract. So that's where the land use, it's the 50 acres times $750 per acre. Cropland is the payment, it's higher than pasture. And then the second payment that is added to that year is that the number of resource concerns met. And then the third and fourth payment types are that the practice and the enhancement. So in this operation, they're basically getting $12,863 over those 50 acres to do cover crops for 4 years. So, and the enhancement for cropland, in this case, we would have done the assessment, which is answering all the questions, data from your operation. In this case, they met 4. They met exactly 4, which is what we provided the example. And then with the enhancement that they did, by the time the contract ended, they exceeded the quality criteria. So that's why the research concern then go to a higher level of conservation. And so that is just to give you, a rough idea, these different type of payments, how is it that we get to the end as to providing that financial assistance. And again, it's just going to depend on the number of resource concerns, also the practices, because the larger the number of acreage, the practices, if you have to do a practice, the practice is paid at a lower rate under CSP. So the average may decrease. But the only way we could tell you for sure is we have to run your numbers. So with that said, let's see, can you put the back the information on the local field offices, Ken?
It's still up on my screen. If you stop sharing, it may show up.
No, you have to share.
Okay.
So questions, I hope at least that, it's hard for us to explain where, these different payments, and I thought at least kind of give you a view of, how it looks in this cost estimator. To get there, we have to do the assessment and go through a lot of information, and but I hope that gives you a general idea.
Thank you, Walter. If for some reason you cannot remember the individual DC, you can always contact me and I will gladly forward the information to the DC, or we'll try to answer your question right then and there. But between this slide and this slide, there are plenty of individuals to reach out to. Happy to answer any questions you may think of tomorrow, next week, 2 weeks from now.
I'm trying to get the phone number for who covers Duval County.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. Duval.
I just learned something also. Derek, it turns out, I guess this is Brian's cell phone number government cell that he took to DeLand with him. So are you still out there?
Yes, I am.
What number for you?
Put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
For the person that was asking about Duval, I just put it on the chat. Now, if we end up the meeting, that will go away. So feel free to email Ken Lackman here if you cannot record the information on time, and we'll get it to you. I'm going to stop the recording for now, but we're still here for questions.
Walter, the chat number just went up. I don't know, I can't see it, but a number went up.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, it's just folks saying thank you. And so